welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new to my channel, my name is Aubrie or @WhiteCoatChasing, and I am a recently accepted, soon-to-be physician assistant student. I applied to 4 schools this last cycle and I got into my top choice school, and I will be starting August 2020. Before we get started, I just want to say if you have any personal questions or want to ask me anything about my journey to getting into PA school, you can always DM me on my Instagram @WhiteCoatChasing. But alright, so today's video is going to be on mistakes you do not want to make on your CASPA application. If you are applying to PA school this next cycle or anytime soon, this is a video you really want to watch, so stay tuned. So first and foremost, and I know this is a really big one and everybody says it, but it deserves the emphasis and to be said again, on your application do not write physician's assistant. There is no apostrophe S, it is just physician assistant. This is a big mistake in like the pre-PA world, and since it is said so much, if you have that on your application, it kind of looks like you may not know the profession as well as you should, or you haven't really done the research. It's really important not to add the apostrophe S because we are not just the assistant to the physician. You are your own healthcare provider and you have a large scope of practice and you do so much more than what a typical assistant is thought of doing. And since the profession is so new and there are so many changes and not everybody knows about it yet, it is really important that you know that it's physician assistant, because if you become a PA and you call it physician's assistant and then your patients are calling it physician's assistant, then that's just going to get spread around more, and that incorrect spelling and name of our profession is just going to get spread more. Be sure to proofread your personal statement and all your experience descriptions to make sure that none of them say physician's assistant. Alright, so second, and going off of that last statement, is make sure you proofread everything. I highly recommend making a Google Doc of all of your experience descriptions and of course your personal statement, and making sure you edit that on there, not just for grammar and spelling, but just to make sure it kind of all flows. If you can, I highly recommend getting other people to read it and make sure you read it out loud, because sometimes you write it and it sounds good, but once you say it out loud, you're like, oh, that's a bit awkward. And also having other eyes read it kind of helps you step away from it, because sometimes when you get so involved in your own application, you kind of lose sight of some of the small errors. So make sure you have at least a friend read it. If not, try to have an advisor read it or somebody who has had experience with CASPA. Also, when you do that, I know it sounds silly, but it is possible if you make multiple Google Docs. When you finally copy and paste everything onto your CASPA application, make sure you are copying and pasting the correct version of your personal statement experience descriptions. When I was copying my personal statement, I almost copied like my second rough draft versus my final draft, and that would have been a complete disaster. So just make sure after you submit everything into your CASPA that you go back and reread everything and make sure it's the correct version. I know it sounds silly, and I know you put so much effort into your application, you think that you won't have these like small grammar errors, but honestly it really is easy to kind of slip over them, especially when there are so many things that you have to put into your application. So just make sure after you submit everything, right before you're ready to actually hit that submit button, that you reread everything. So the next mistake is not including everything you've learned in your experiences in your description. By this I mean not just including what you actually did in your description, but also what you've learned outside of your roles. So the admissions committees know what an EMT did, what a CNA does, and of course you have to include your duties in there so they know to differentiate it between a healthcare experience or a patient care experience. So it is still good to put like your actual duties in that position, but it's also really great to mention things you learned outside of those duties. So for example, if you learned about kind of teamwork when you were a CNA and worked with LVNs and RNs, that's a great thing to include. In your shadowing experiences, if you got to see a supervising physician and a PA collaborate, that's a really good thing to include in that. So yes, of course, include the actual duties you had, such as taking vitals or help transferring patients, whatever it may be, but also include some of like the soft skills that you learned throughout your experiences, such as communication, teamwork, and all the other things that are so key to the PA profession, and show that you started learning those before you even started school. So the next mistake is not paying attention to deadlines, and I know it sounds so crazy that people would forget, deadlines because, you have those dates stuck in your mind, but honestly, when you start applying, especially if you apply to many schools, they all have their own like supplemental application deadline, the fee deadline, and it kind of all starts blending into like these random days that you just cannot remember. Some schools are rolling admissions, so it means applying earlier is better, and some schools are non-rolling, so if you're still accumulating patient care experience, it's better to apply to the non-rolling schools a little bit later, so you can have, as much as you possibly can on your application. To help keep all of this straight, I would highly recommend a spreadsheet, and I know I recommend spreadsheets for everything, but they are so helpful. I would recommend keeping a spreadsheet for not only like your application deadlines, for rolling and non-rolling schools, but also their supplementals, any fee deadlines, Any kind of deadline, I would put it on a spreadsheet and make sure it's organized under each school, so you can just have one huge sheet to look at versus kind of looking through all your emails and trying to find all those dates. This is also important because if you apply to a school and then you miss their supplemental application deadline, then that money that you spent applying to that school just was wasted. So this isn't just to help you get into school, but it's also to help you not waste money. Because I know so many people who applied to like a school and then forgot about the supplemental application and kind of just got buried in their emails, and then they were too late to apply, and so they just wasted like $55. So spreadsheets, 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 start making them now. Even if you're like still way away from applying and you're watching this just way ahead of time, start spreadsheets now. They help you with everything from hours, from who you shadowed, what you learned, and then even when you're applying to keep track of the dates you need to submit everything by. The next mistake is applying to schools where you do not meet the minimum. If they have a set minimum on a GPA or GRE anything, that is a set minimum, meaning if you don't have that and you apply, your application will most likely just be thrown away. You want to make sure that every school you apply to, you meet all of their minimums, all of their course, requirements and everything, patient care experience, whether it's paid, not paid. You need to make their minimums at least. So usually most schools have the list of their accepted students like stats on their page from like the last cycle. So ideally you'd want to see if your GPA and your stats kind of line up with those or are competitive compared to those. Obviously, people get in with having lower stats and people get in with having higher stats. Those are just the averages, but you want to make sure that you kind of know and have an idea of what the school is looking for. Applying to CASPA is expensive and it's really just time consuming and very emotionally draining. And if you apply to schools where your stats aren't really competitive, where you don't meet any of the requirements, then that's just going to be financially draining to you, and then you're just going to be hearing these rejections and getting really upset, versus if you apply to schools that are appropriate for you and your stats and like your whole mission statement and theme, then you probably will get more acceptances and more good news. For one school, you may not be a qualified applicant like at all, but to another school, you could be absolutely perfect, but you want to make sure you find those schools that really connect with what you have on your application and kind of match the stats that you have. This mistake I've seen so often, and it is starting your CASPA application really late. Even if like the programs that you want to apply to are non-rolling and they don't need to be submitted until like October, still start your application about as soon as it opens. Implementing all of your coursework and all of your background information into your CASPA application is very tedious, and there's a lot of like small things that you need to do and a lot of like documents you need to pull together to be able to incorporate all that. So if you get that done way ahead of time, you can focus on the really important things such as your experiences and your personal statement later on. This includes sending your letter of rec writers, their like little form on CASPA, late. Do not do that. Not only is it not professional because it doesn't give them a lot of time to get everything ready, but also if one of your letter writers kind of drops out or something happens and they can't write you a letter of rec, it might be really hard to find someone to be able to write one at that such short of notice, and you may not be able to apply on time, which could ultimately lead to a rejection. So if you already talked to your letter writers and you've already asked them and they've agreed to write you a letter, I would send them that recommendation form as soon as you can. Even if they do fill out the letter like months before you actually apply, at least it's in there and secure and safe and you know that you have that done. So when I was applying, one of my letter writers was taking a long time to get her letter in, and I was getting really nervous that I was going to have to find a new letter writer. And this was like weeks before that I was like, oh crap, like who else could write me a letter? Luckily she did it, and even though I asked her ahead of time, there still are some people that things pop up. So I would keep a couple extra like letter writers in the back of your mind if possible, but get all of that done as early as possible. I know that early is a word I keep using in this video, but honestly, it is so much better to get all those things done ahead of time, because when you actually have to apply and have to make sure that all your ducks are in a row, it's nicer to have these little things done ahead of time so that you don't have to be worrying about it last minute. So if you take anything away from this video, just know that do everything earlier than you think you have to. Like start entering all of your classes as soon as CASPA opens, start entering all your background information, get your letter recommendation little link sent out way ahead of time. Early, and spreadsheets are like the biggest suggestion I have for you. So this last mistake is not common, but it is something I do want to say, and that is lying about your hours. I get messages from, people starting out their pre-PA journey, and they ask like, how do I have my provider sign off on my hours? And I tell them like, oh, CASPA is actually an honor system and not many schools require you to provide proof. And most of them are like, what? But some of them I can see like the wheels turning in their mind like, oh, so I can lie about my hours. Okay. And like I said, it's not common, but I have seen people kind of react like that and I do get worried. But just know that if CASPA finds out that you're lying about your hours, they can flag your application, and that is just, it's not good. Don't do it. Although there are many schools and the PA profession's growing quite rapidly, it's still quite small and a lot of people know each other. So if something comes out that you're lying, word can spread pretty fast, and it's just something you just really shouldn't do. Also, if you lie about your hours or make up an experience to look really good on your application and then you get into your interview and they ask you about it and you have nothing to say about it, the admissions committee and the people interviewing can see right through that. Also, if your calculations don't add up, like you worked like only 2 months but you have like 8 weeks and it's like 60 hours a week, something crazy like that, or just like the hours just don't add up, admissions committees see that and they know that you're lying. Obviously there are people out there who have worked like 2 jobs a week and like work over 40 hours. That's possible, and you know, the math and stuff that adds up. But if you have one job and it says you're working like these ridiculous hours and you just don't have any time for like breaks in there or taking away your lunch break or anything like that, the schools can see all of that. They can see right through that. They've seen many applications where people lie, so just don't lie. Alright, so overall, the mistakes that you should avoid are physician's assistant. That is just a no-no. Make sure you proofread everything on your application and there's no spelling or grammar errors, because those little things can really show that you didn't put as much effort into your application. Not that spelling errors will be like the end-all be-all of getting into PA school, but if you know they're kind of iffy about your application or deciding between a few, those little mistakes may push them towards the no side, unfortunately. Of course, spreadsheets. I always talk about how important spreadsheets are, and when you're actually applying to CASPA is the perfect time to use spreadsheets. I also use spreadsheets to kind of check off what I did. If I already edited all of my experience descriptions, I checked that off my spreadsheet. If I needed to add, you know, all of my shadowing experiences, I added that. So I kind of kept track of my progress in CASPA also on a spreadsheet. Also, only applied to schools that you at least meet their minimum and ideally are competitive against their stats of the applicants that they accepted the last cycle that they usually post on their website. And then last but not least, of course, do not lie on your application about hours, about experiences, on your personal statement. Just don't lie, okay? But alright, those are some of my biggest tips to you for CASPA mistakes that you just really do not want to make. If you have any CASPA questions or any questions about the pre-PA journey at all, you can always message me on my Instagram at whitecoatchasing or leave a comment below. Also, if you're enjoying my pre-PA videos and would like to see more, please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all are staying safe and sane out there, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.